Well, I had a question from someone who commented on one of the articles that I'd written about the book of Revelation and what it has to say about the nation of Israel. One of the claims that was made was that the Old Testament has multiple prophecies about the last days, latter days, that is the days that we're in now, restoration of the Jews to the biblical borders of the land of Israel. I had a very simple question to ask about the person who made that claim, and that was, can you give me one post-exilic prophet who states that Israel will be returned to its land? The question actually assumes that all of the prophecies about Israel being returned to its land correspond to its return from the exile. That is, the exile to Babylon. So the book of Jeremiah prophesies that because of their wickedness and rebellion, they would be exiled to Babylon, which indeed they were. And the claim was made by the person who made the assertion that the book of Zechariah makes such a claim. And the book of Zechariah, they claimed, was indeed a post-exilic, that is, after the exile, prophet. So in looking at the book of Zechariah, the second last book of the Old Testament, we find in the opening verses that it makes the claim, that makes the statement rather, that Zechariah is receiving these prophecies in what he calls the second year of the reign of Darius. Now, just to point out the time frame here, the exile ended with the decree of Cyrus. So Cyrus is the one who succeeded Darius. Cyrus is the one who decreed that the Jews could return to their land. And this is recorded in the book of Nehemiah. So Nehemiah describes this, and he talks about those people who'd come back, and they'd come back to the land of Israel, to the city of Jerusalem, and they had discovered that Jerusalem was in ruins. And he receives word of this, and of course the book of Nehemiah unfolds. Part way through the book of Nehemiah, Ezra comes in as the priest to consecrate the altar and so on. So we had those other biblical books that form the background to this. But the first point to draw anyone's attention to is that Zechariah is not so much post-exilic, he's in that transition phase. And that is, some Jews will return during the writing of Zechariah. We know that because he actually says it in about chapter 4 of the book. But there's the first thing we want to point out. The second thing I want to point out is just how much of the time frame, the predictive time frame of Zechariah, confirms what the other prophets were saying. That is, that once the exile is over, the 70 years is over, some of the Jews will return. But we also have in Zechariah the statement that many of the Jews will be scattered. And this is called the dispersion or the diaspora. And so Zechariah actually states this. So we then have other time frame predictive prophecies that relate to the Messiah, who is referred to in Zechariah as the branch. And we see that Christ is often referred to in these horticultural terms. He's the shoot of the root of Jesse and so on. And Paul in Romans 9, 10, 11 talks about him being that plant that people are grafted into. So this is a messianic picture of Christ. We have the statement that this branch in one day will atone for the sins of the people. And of course that fits what we know about Christ. So again, as we go through Zechariah, we see that he is actually not post-exilic in the sense that he's not talking about a return to the land despite the fact that Israel has already returned after the exile. In fact, this is in complete concord with the other prophets. As he's talking about the future glory of Jerusalem, he's actually talking about the Messiah coming and dwelling in their midst. And he says it plainly. And that this will be the focal point of Jerusalem's future glory. Not some future to us, glory of Israel or glory of Jerusalem, but future to the people that are hearing this, future to Zechariah himself. The prophecies of the Messiah coming and being the focal point of the glory of Jerusalem are seen in scriptures like this. Behold, your king is coming, righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey, which the New Testament writers refer to Christ fulfilling that prophecy of Zechariah. He's called the cornerstone, same as the other. That's in Zechariah 10 verse 4. So we have these prophecies of Christ. We have prophecies of his betrayal, where Judas would betray him. It says, if it seems good to you, this is in Zechariah 11 and verse 12, if it seems good to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out as my wages 30 pieces of silver. Then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. Now, significantly, of course, that refers to Judas. It refers to the details of what happened when Judas betrayed Christ. But because the high priest at that time, and there's prophecies made to Joshua, the then high priest, but that are conditional prophecies, that if he and his successors would be faithful in keeping the ways of the Lord, that they would be blessed. Of course, they didn't. And Caiaphas marks the low point of Israel's apostasy when he rejected and condemned the Messiah, Christ. And so we have Zechariah prophesying that God's covenant with the two houses of Israel, Judah and Ephraim, or Judah and Joseph as they're variously called, would be annulled. It would be broken. It says in Zechariah 11 verse 14, then I broke my second staff, union, annulling the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. And so we have these, again, we have these prophecies that go on after this betrayal of Christ, rejection of Christ, and then it describes Jerusalem coming under siege. And it says in Zechariah chapter 12 and verse 2, the siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. And for those of us that understand first century history, when Vespasian came and attacked Jerusalem, he also attacked the cities around Jerusalem, the cities of Judah. And at one point he was nearly killed. And his soldiers formed the tortoise maneuver, the turtle maneuver, and protected him and got him out of that city, that town of Judah.
And suddenly they realized their leader was no longer with them. Vespasian was somewhere at the top of the town, in trouble. The men who were with him covered him with their shields and pulled him to safety. It had been a close call for the 58-year-old
And the
warrior.
Romans came back and completely massacred everyone, thus fulfilling this prophecy in Zechariah chapter 12. It's not a prophecy of some future glory of Israel. It's a prophecy of the future glory of the Messiah and the glory that Israel and Judah, Jerusalem at that time would experience because they hosted the Messiah. I've written more about this, and you can find this on my website, andrewcorbett.net, where I go through and I answer each of these claims in the book of Zechariah. If you'd like to have a look at that, please visit my website. You'll see that there, that article, and you can read that. If you want to understand more about the book of Revelation, I encourage you to have a look at my ebook. You can get it as a physical book as well, but my ebook, The Most Embarrassing Book in the Bible. And the reason for that title is based on something C.S. Lewis said. And in response to C.S. Lewis, who described the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24 verse 34, as the most embarrassing verse in the Bible, I pick up on that, and my treatment of Matthew 24 as an answer to C.S. Lewis is called The Most Embarrassing Verse in the Bible, and my treatment of the book of Revelation, which chapters 1 to 19 correspond to chapter 24 of Matthew, the Olivet Discourse, and you can have a look at those, and thousands of people have, And I invite people, have a look at it and see if this classic understanding of biblical eschatology makes sense to you. Well, have a look again at the website to read more detail about my explanation of Zechariah. I trust that you will have an open mind so that we can all grow in our knowledge of the Lord and His Word.